The NFL offseason is here, which means it's time to talk about trades. And obviously, more of these will manifest as time goes on. But right now, there are 3 rumors circulating about superstar players who could potentially be on the move. Those being Mathew Stafford, Myles Garrett, and Cooper Kupp. So today, we're going to be talking about the likelihood of each of these trades happening, where these players hypothetically could wind up, and a few other of the idiosyncrasies. Starting things off with the quarterback, the most valuable position on the field, potentially top 5 quarterback, Mathew Stafford, is rumored to want out of Los Angeles. His wife posting cryptic stuff on social media. He is desperate to get a new contract. He wants a little bit more money in the final few years of his prime. And from what some people are saying, the Rams are not willing to give him that long multi-year extension he seems to want. So where does that leave him? Rumors are circulating, Stafford may get shipped off, but to where? And before we get into the destinations, I'm just going to say, I think you agree with me on this, the Rams would be out of their mind to trade Mathew Stafford right now. This was the only team who put up a legitimate fight against the Eagles in the playoffs. You could argue they would have beat the Eagles if not for the snow. Why would they blow it up by trading their quarterback? Their defense is only going to get better. It's got a ton of young players who are fantastic year 1. They're going to take that second step. Puka Nacua presumably will be healthier in year 3. They're going to be able to build their offensive line for agency. They've got some cap space. Why would you trade Mathew Stafford, a great quarterback who's already been to the Super Bowl, got it done, and really, there's no better options in the draft. Even if you get the 3rd overall pick somehow, you're not taking Shedeur Sanders and not taking several steps back from it immediately. You're not getting Cam Ward and not immediately regressing. There's just no way this happens to me, but it's worth talking about. A lot of buzz, a lot of headlines.
Well, the biggest reason a team would ever move off of a quarterback that has top 5, top 10 potential, you mentioned they were the closest team to actually beating the Eagles in the playoffs, is if you have a quarterback waiting in the wings who can take over the job, is young, and you want to build around. The Rams don't have that. You're telling me they want to build around Jimmy G
Are
or
we
Stetson
disrespecting
Bennett?
Stetson Bennett? Is that what we're doing this episode?
You're telling me that's
2-time national champion Stetson Bennett? His ring finger's real heavy, Tristan.
They wouldn't be moving off of Stafford for one of those guys. So that doesn't even make sense from that regard. And when it comes to the idea of paying Stafford a lot of money, making him a higher paid quarterback, they're really in the perfect window for them to do that. They have Puka Nacua, Kobe Turner, Kyron Williams, Braden Fisk, Byron Young. Some of their best players all are making less than $6 million. The only quote-unquote bad contract they have on their team right now is Cooper Kupp, who was, I think his cap hit is set to be $29 million, but you can also cut him and save $20 million this offseason and maybe get a younger receiver in there who can work alongside Puka Nacua and Mathew Stafford. So it is really the perfect time to be paying your veteran quarterback a lot of money. So I don't get why they wouldn't want to do that, even from a roster construction perspective. Maybe you look at it and you think they're going to go after a veteran quarterback, but why would you want to move off of Stafford for a downgrade in someone like Aaron Rodgers or even Kirk Cousins, who you'd have to trade for and he's even more expensive? Or maybe you want to try and bring Sam Darnold in from free agency and build around him. I mean, he is a younger option.
I don't think anyone wants to try and bring in Sam Darnold. I'll be honest with you, Chief. They watched the final 2 games.
None of it really makes sense from where the Rams would be going in the future. The only way you can maybe make it make sense if they make a trade with the Giants is if they were able to finagle the 3rd overall pick out of them, or if they get a 2nd and a 1st round next year, whatever compensation that is, and then they use that to move up the board to get which quarterback they have fallen in love with. But I just don't see from the Rams' perspective how this trade rumor makes any sense. And I think ultimately it's really just being floated out there as leverage for Stafford to try and get more money.
Yeah, we don't think it's going to happen, but let's talk about if it actually does, if the improbable comes to manifest. There are 2 landing spots I think Stafford could wind up on and immediately take that team to contender status, and one which seems to be the most likely landing spot, which would just basically put an end to Mathew Stafford's career. If he goes to the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Minnesota Vikings, I don't know what the compensation would look like. Probably a late 1st round draft pick, maybe some change on the side. I think both those teams immediately become, maybe not for the Steelers Super Bowl contenders, they really need to build up their offensive line, but if Stafford goes to the Vikings, that is a really good team. Assuming they don't have to give up J.J. McCarthy, but feel like giving him 1-2 more years to really matriculate. You've got Kevin O'Connell, who's already got experience with Stafford on his team. That's a pretty good landing spot. That takes the Vikings to the best team in the NFC North, besides maybe the Lions, if they somehow stay healthy for the entire season. Steelers, same deal. They'd be able to get in gunfights with teams like the Bengals or the Ravens. Pretty good defense backing them up. Obviously, the George Pickens situation in flux, the running back situation in flux, but he'd make them a lot better. He's certainly better than Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, who got them to 11 wins this year. So either of those 2 landing spots, I could see the teams wanting to do it. I don't think it's going to happen, but those are the best two spots for me.
I couldn't really see the Vikings being a realistic option because I think a move to try and get Mathew Stafford would signify that they don't really believe in J.J. McCarthy right now, and they're kind of doubting that draft pick position, which from what we've seen in reporting surrounding the Vikings and that situation, it seems like they do have faith in J.J. McCarthy. And I don't really see the Steelers as an option because when you look at the playing for the Rams versus playing for the Steelers, the Rams, they have Puka Nacua, they have Sean McVay, and they have a better system and winning culture in place than I think the Steelers do right now as far as contending in the playoffs. I mean, going to the Steelers, you're going to be playing outdoors in Pittsburgh, in LA. You get to play in much warmer weather. So comparing those two situations, I don't really get, which goes to maybe Mathew Stafford moving on from the Rams at all. I don't get from Stafford's perspective why he would want to go to the Rams and go to a team like the Giants or the Steelers. Or the Vikings would make sense, but I don't think the Vikings would actually want them.
Yeah. The pushback on the JJ thing, McCarthy is still the youngest quarterback in the NFL. After Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders go to teams and become starters this year, he will still be the youngest quarterback in the NFL in terms of starting ability. He is a really young player who is coming off a pretty major lower body injury. The Vikings organization clearly has faith in him. They're going to build a team around him, try to maximize his talents, but getting Stafford here gives you another 1 year cushion, lets JJ rehab a little bit more, and if Stafford, who has had injuries in the past, goes down, hey, the backup is already on the roster. You are perfectly set to move forward and then cut Stafford the very next year if it's just not going to work out, or try and flip him again, trade him for a second, third round pick. It would work in Minnesota. I don't think it's going to happen because the asking price from LA would be too high, but now looking over at the Giants, even if they give him the third overall pick, Sean McVay's day-to-day. I feel like he could retire any given offseason. This team is primed for a championship, and you are just going to be taking 3-4 steps back if you go and get Cam Ward, who best case scenario, top 10 quarterback year one, or Shedeur Sanders, best case scenario, top 12, 15 quarterback year one. You are not going to be at close to the same level, and by the time that guy might be ready to take that next step, replace Stafford in terms of quality, the window's going to be closed. You're going to be paying Puka Nacua, Kyron Williams, Jared Verse. It's just not the move. There's no possible way the Giants get him out the Rams. And even if he was traded to New York, I think Stafford retires on the spot. He'd be playing by a terrible offensive line, outdoors, terrible field, terrible franchise, bad weather. Why would he want to play there? He already did this song and dance with the Lions, except he was playing indoors in Detroit. So it's even worse than his time in the NFC North. There's no way he plays for the Giants.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to why, to me, it doesn't really make sense why he would want to move off from the Rams organization to speak to Sean McVay. I have never really believed the idea that he was going to retire at any moment. As his career has progressed, I think there have been multiple opportunities where it looks like the Rams might be going a slight downslope. And he takes the opportunity to go back in with the Rams, rebuild the roster a little bit, and try and win football games. So I think he is in love with football and coaching. I don't see him going to be a commentator anytime soon. I've never really believed that. From the Giants' perspective, I've seen some Giants fans float out the idea that it wouldn't be a good idea to trade for Stafford, or that they shouldn't or don't want to pull the trigger. I think if you're the Giants, in a heartbeat you pull that. Joe Shane wants to save his job. Brian Daboll wants to save his job. You got a quarterback who's capable of putting up top 10 production. You have a rookie wide receiver who had 1,200 yards last year with Tommy DeVito, Daniel Jones, who's
the most targets in the NFL outside
Drew
of
Lock,
Chase.
Tim Boyle throwing passes to him. You're going to be more productive. And if you give up a second or first next year and use the third overall pick on a blue chip player, you add offensive line in free agency, you add a corner, all of a sudden you're a very competitive football team in that NFC. So from the Giants' perspective, I think they do it in a heartbeat if Stafford actually wants to play with them and for Brian Daboll for whatever reason that might be. I don't quite get it. But from the Giants' perspective, you do it immediately.
Yeah, they're not getting Stafford unless they're throwing 3 out there. It's just not happening. It would be a year of desperation. Joe Shane needs to save his job because he thinks he's going to be fired by Thanksgiving if they don't start winning games move. That's not going to happen. Anyway, moving on to Myles Garrett, the best player to potentially be traded in a long time. And he has made it very clear he wants out of Cleveland and he wants to go to a real contender. So you look around the NFL, you say, okay, who's got the draft picks, who's got the cap space, and who's not in the AFC North? Because the Browns are an incompetent team, sure, but they're not so incompetent they're going to send Myles Garrett in division to play them twice a year. They're not going to create the Trey Hendrickson Myles Garrett combo, the TJ Watt Myles Garrett combo, the pick a Ravens edge player in Myles Garrett combo. That will not be happening. So I think there are two legitimate options, and then one which is a bit of a pipe dream. Obviously, the Lions have the cap space. They've got some draft capital, and they've got a few players they could package in. That's a pretty enticing spot to me. I could see Detroit going ahead and pulling the trigger, getting Hutch, another top-tier guy to play off of him, reaffirming that defense that even if people do start going down, they still got a superstar player who's super durable. And the Commanders are a legitimate option too because they've got more cap space than any other contender in the league. They've got draft picks. They've got an exciting young front seven, and they've got one of the better defensive coaches in the league. Those are the two likely options. And if the Bills can somehow work their cap out, cut Miller, cut Milano, trade or cut a few other people, I could see them maybe pulling the trigger and getting a Myles Garrett to try and revitalize that passing defense. That one's a bit of a stretch. It would take a lot of work for Buffalo to pull that off.
Outside of the teams that are in a rebuilding phase and need all of the high first-round picks possible in order to build towards a better future, every other team should be calling the Browns to try and get Myles Garrett on their team, and he wants to play for a contender, so a team like the Lions makes a lot of sense. Some Lions fans seem to be like, well, what do we need Myles Garrett for? We have Aiden Hutchinson. Well, having Aiden Hutchinson and Myles Garrett, two Defensive Player of the Year potential candidates every single season, is going to be impossible for another team to block, and is going to would be a terror for the NFC North to have to play 2 times a season. So the people that kind of like, why do we need Myles Garrett? I don't really get why you're even pushing back on the idea of adding Myles Garrett to the team.
I can tell you exactly why that is. It's they want to believe, oh, we would have won the Super Bowl if we didn't get hurt, so we need to just run it back and try and get the team healthy. It's a delusion about how good they were last year. The Lions were the worst 15-2 team ever last season.
And much like we just spoke about with the Rams having a lot of young players that are on their rookie deals or not getting paid that much, you take a look at some of the Lions' best players. I know they've handed out big contracts recently, but you're not really paying Jahmyr Gibbs, Jamison Williams, Sam Laporta, Brian Branch. Penei Sewell's larger cap hit is still not coming until I believe the season after this. So you have the cap space to add someone like Myles Garrett's contract to your team. So I think for the Lions, it makes a whole lot of sense to speak to the Commanders. If I was Myles Garrett, I'd want to go there because you take a look at the step the Commanders defense made this past offseason. They're one of the worst defenses in the NFL before Dan Quinn arrived. He completely revitalized that group. They made a lot of smart moves in free agency. They have a sneaky deep defensive line, especially on the interior with Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen. That's the other one, among some other talent. And they also added Jerzon Newton, who in his rookie year wasn't overly productive. But there's a lot of talent along that Commanders defensive line. And adding Myles Garrett to that group, a team that just made it to the conference championship, I think would be huge. I think if you're the Commanders, you're really trying to make this happen. Much like if you're the Lions, you want to get that deal done as soon as possible. Then people have thrown the Eagles out there, which from their perspective, the best way to replace losing a 20-year-old Josh Sweat is replacing him with Myles Garrett, which would be phenomenal. You don't really need the draft picks. You have a lot of high-end talent on both sides of the ball because of how good Howie Roseman has drafted. So I think from their perspective, you're trying to outbid whatever the Commanders and Lions are offering up.
Yeah, I hope that doesn't happen. I just don't see it quite manifesting that way. Maybe it's pure delusion. Maybe it's not wanting to see the Eagles repeat as Super Bowl champions. I'm struggling to grasp the idea of Myles Garrett going to that defensive line, who is phenomenal without a true superstar on the outside. That's a scary concept. Looking at some teams I don't think he's going to go to, the Arizona Cardinals. I get Jonathan Gannon has improved that defense to the extent he can. He needs more talent on that roster to have them take that next step, become a top 10 unit, truly elite. I don't think Garrett wants to go to that team. There's questions with Kyler Murray. They're not really a legitimate contender. And frankly, there's not that big of a difference between Arizona and Cleveland right now. Looking at the Bears, I kind of feel the same way. Sure, he would make their defense a lot better, but this is not a contending team, even with Myles Garrett, unless they drastically overhaul that offensive line, get a few new wide receivers, replace Keenan Allen. I still don't think this is a contending team in Chicago. It would take too much work in addition to getting Myles Garrett, which would make the work which needs to be done a lot harder for this to be a truly top-tier team. So I think Garrett vetoes both those. He's going to say, no, I'm not going, unless he's just desperate to get out of Cleveland, which he probably is at this point in his career, and they give the best package.
Well, any team he would go to, he instantly raises the floor of that defense an immense amount. It would make the Bears defense a whole lot better. I think you're discrediting how good the Bears can be, depending on how good David Caleb Williams is in year 2. It is interesting to note like the idea of him going to a bad team with a lot of cap space. You mentioned the Arizona Cardinals, who weren't necessarily horrible last year, but they still have a lot of work to do on the offensive side of the ball, and Kyler Murray's a big question mark. And then there's a team like the Patriots, who have over $100 million in cap space, would love to bring someone like Garrett onto the team. Garrett obviously doesn't want to go there, but what if the Browns get an offer they can't refuse from the Patriots? They're desperate to add someone like Myles Garrett, and the Patriots go, hey, we'll take on some of that Deshaun Watson contract that you desperately want off the books in order to get Myles Garrett onto our team.
I think Myles Garrett then retires and waits for his yellow jacket instead of going and playing for New England. Grant Vrabel seems like a popular players coach, so maybe that works out. Maybe he sucks it up and goes and plays with Jabril Peppers, with Keon White, with Christian Gonzalez. That's kind of a scary defense when you ignore how terrible the wide receivers and the offensive line are, which are going to hold that team back immensely from being a contender. But again, the Chicago Bears, you say you think Caleb Williams is going to get better, unless they overhaul that offensive line, which they will struggle to do if they take a big chunk of their cap and spend it on Myles Garrett and send multiple draft picks to get Myles Garrett. This is not a contending team even with Garrett because it would cost too much to get him. Cardinals, it's just not happening. I guarantee you he's not going to be a Cardinal. Anyway, Vikings were floated out there by some people. I don't think that's going to happen. They got 2 really good edge players under contract in Van Ginkel and Grenard, and they've got Dallas Turner, and I think Minnesota would like to hold on to their 2025 first-round pick, even though Quasi's not exactly stellar at using those suckers. So, probably not going to Minnesota. Rounding things out, we've got Cooper Kupp, the least desirable of these 3-star players. A lot of places he could go. Frankly, I think he's going to get cut before he gets traded. We know he's going to have a pretty big cap hit. I don't think any team really wants to take that on to get the preferred shot at him. They will try and bid for him in free agency instead of just taking the $29 million, which would come with him on the Rams. Having said that, I think he'd be pretty good on the Cowboys. It'd be a un-Jerry Jones thing to do to go out there and get him, but give CeeDee Lamb a number 2 receiver, clear some stuff up for him in coverage, give a really good technical player like Dak Prescott, a guy who's always going to be in the right spot on his routes. I think the Vikings are an interesting spot if they want to move off Addison, who has had some off-the-field issues and did not have a stellar year 2. And I think the Giants are actually a pretty good landing spot for him as well because they need a number 2 receiver beside Malik Neighbors. They need someone who has a veteran presence, leadership, technically skilled, and they're going to be trying to help whatever quarterback they bring in, whether that be Mathew Stafford, Cam Ward, Jadir Sanders, Jackson Dart, 3rd overall. That'd be a pretty funny pick. Whoever that might be, they're going to look to help him out. So those are the 3 teams I think are most likely to go out there and get him, but I think he just gets cut.
There is no team right now that should be in the market for Cooper Kupp to trade for him because his cap hit is close to $30 million. The Rams will save $20 million in cap space if they cut him after June 1st, from what I can tell at least. And I think there is something to be said for Cooper Kupp. He really only has 1 year of truly elite and special production when they won the Super Bowl, and he had 1,900 yards and I think 16 touchdowns. So he never has been a consistent receiver that is dominating year in and year out. And I think the teams you named are very good options for him. And I think he needs to go to a team that has already an elite number 1 receiver that takes all of the attention away from himself, has another receiver that can operate on the outside where he can be the veteran presence in that locker room and dominate the middle of the field, get anywhere between 500 and 800 yards, and be a reliable option for the quarterback. One you didn't mention, I know you mentioned the Giants, which I do think is an option, and you mentioned all the reasons why I think he'd be a good fit there. But another team would be the Vikings. If you added Cooper Kupp to the Vikings receiver room, you've Justin Jefferson, the best receiver in the NFL. You've Jordan Addison, who's wildly talented, and then you've Cooper Kupp in the slot. That would be an excellent receiver room for J.J. McCarthy, a young quarterback to throw to. Veterans all over the place and highly talented receivers all over the place.
I mean, the problem with that sentiment is Justin Jefferson does a lot of his best work out of the slot. Cooper Kupp kind of seems like a limited player in that aspect. You can't send him out wide to be that true X. Addison, good route runner, but most of the stuff he's doing is well downfield. He's not going to be the first option on many plays. So he'd be cutting into the production of Justin Jefferson, making him do something he's slightly worse at, limiting his repertoire a little bit if you just took him out of the slot entirely for the sake of inserting a 38-year-old Cooper Kupp. Granted, the yards per game for Kupp is actually pretty similar with excluding that one breakout 1,900-yard season. He just can't stay on the field. He's averaging between 70 and 90 per, which is pretty good. You like seeing that from your star receivers, but Kupp being on the field, availability, the best ability, something Kupp has lacked ever since he won the Triple Crown. But I would not be excited to see Minnesota go out there and get him. For you, I hope he goes to the Giants. I hope they don't overpay him. I hope every Rams player who's available just goes to New York. Become the West Coast or the East Coast Rams.
I want to go over the teams that are currently leading the odds to have Cooper Kupp play for their organization next year. The Broncos are the team at the top of the odds. They don't really make much sense to me because there's not enough talent on that team to bring enough attention away from him unless they're really just going to break the bank for old Cooper Kupp. The Lions come in at number 2. I guess that makes a little bit of sense.
No, it doesn't.
You have
is that Vegas?
This is Vegas.
Vegas is wrong, man. They are trying to steal your money.
The Lions at number 2 doesn't really make that much sense to me. They have Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta dominating the middle of the field already. The Commanders, I think that's the most realistic option from this list because they have Terry McLaurin dominating on the outside. They really need another wide receiver 2 on the outside. De'Ami Brown did have a good playoffs, and then Cooper Kupp could be another veteran presence to that locker room. They certainly went that route on the defensive side of the ball last year. The Patriots, that makes no sense.
White wide receiver in New England. That's why it makes sense. They're playing the hits.
It would be a slightly better version, maybe, but also more injury prone of Adam Thielen on the Panthers last year. The Chiefs, I don't see that happening. Steelers.
Well, to be fair, if you said D-Hop to the Chiefs a few years ago, you'd say you didn't see that happening either. Everyone eventually matriculates to Kansas City to ring chase, man.
Steelers, that makes some sense because you add a slot that can play next to George Pickens.
Oh boy, George Pickens and Cooper Kupp. That's quite the dynamic you've got there between your two receivers.
And then there's the Bills. Everyone else is plus 1,000 odds according to Vegas right now. I don't really see him going to any of those teams. So to me, it's a complete mystery where he'll actually go next season.
Could go to the UFL. That's always an option. Revitalize your career with the Birmingham Stallions, then come back to the NFL and get that contract. You never know with these guys, man.
That has been our reaction to the idea of Stafford getting traded, potentially to the Giants. Will Myles Garrett get traded at all? Where will Myles Garrett go if he gets traded? Who will Cooper Kupp play for next season? Like the video, subscribe to the channel, use code Thicc on Underdog for bonus cash up to $1,000, and we'll see you in the next one.